Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to this very interesting session that we're having today. My name is Nina Spiezas Jerby. I am a KMer and part of the SIKM and KM for Dev community, but I'm also part of the Knowledge Summit Dublin community. So today I'm very pleased to be able to have this conversation with three of our most seasoned experts in our KM communities, because often we hear them in presentations or videos or and separately, but it's very rare that we hear them discuss things together, and not just CAM, but also related stuff that are important, stuff that are relevant. So when Knowledge Summit Dublin happened, and we were all in the pub on the last night, a photo happened. That photo that Stan had in his LinkedIn post, and I said, that is a very rare, a rare situation when all three of them were in one place at the same time. And what's rare too was that Dave was actually smiling that photo. So I said, we need to do it again. We need to use that photo again. So Stan used it thankfully in his LinkedIn post, and I said, well, I'm going to borrow that and we're going to use it as a photo for our next event. So that's why this conversation happened. And I'm hoping that we'll have that same vibe that we had during the pub. It's relaxed, it's informal. We're chatting. There's no presentation. It's really just having fun all together. So um, if you're able to grab a drink or something or a beverage, in case that'll make you feel like you're, just.
I can give you a stranger coincidence, I mean, years ago, Tom Stewart, Leif Edmondson, and myself were trying desperately to get together to have a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't find any opportunity. And I was in the men's toilet at Heathrow Terminal 3. And I heard Tom's voice, and he came out of the stalls with Dave, it's you. And then Leif came around the corner. Yeah. And we ended up with a meeting in the gents' lavatory, which then did migrate. But you can get stranger coincidences.
In the men's toilet. It's a good thing that's the only thing that happened. Because I remember, anyway, that's another story. But yeah, so well, let me just start again by maybe introducing our speakers. A lot of us here probably know them through their usual labels. Stan is the head of SIKM. Dave is head of Kinevin. Did I pronounce that right, Dave? And Liam is our speaker in KM Dublin. So maybe I'll say a little introduction and maybe add a fun fact, and then maybe please correct me if what I read is incorrect. So Liam brings 40 years of practical experience in diverse industries, coupled with an extensive academic background. He's known for his custom designed intelligence and insight workshops that help organizations deeply understand competitive environments, fostering new points of view on the future, strategy options, and execution. His work is about making a real difference in thinking, decisions, and action for corporate clients, including some of the world's best known brands. So he holds a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh and has authored and edited 10 books and over 60 articles. Fun fact of Liam, which he had shared with me, was that he said he had delivered twins at around 4 a.m. one fine Irish morning, calves from a cow, which is one of the many delights of growing up on a dairy farm. Did I say that correctly, Liam? Anything to add? A welcoming message maybe you'd like to add?
Well, I was sober enough at the time, but I think it was really triplets.
Oh, really? Okay. But that must be cool, actually, seeing cows. But calves, oh gosh. Um, how did they even fit? But anyway, that's another story. So going to Stan. Stan, apart from being SIKM leader, he's a seasoned knowledge management author, speaker, and community leader with 30 years as a practitioner in the field. He launched Digital's first KM program in 1996. He helped develop Compact's corporate KM strategy and led HP's worldwide consulting integration KM program. Do people know what Compact is? The young people here, and HP even.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. Stan founded the SIKM Leaders Community in 2005 and leads its 1,300 global members in online discussions and monthly calls. He has published over 1,000 articles and 7 books on KM and communities of practice. His expertise covers implementing KM programs, gaining buy in, and leading communities. His latest book, here's a plug, 12 Steps to KM Success, a guide to implementing knowledge management, was published last week. Oh, no, maybe, was that last week or 2 weeks ago?
Last week. Yeah.
Last week. And is available on Amazon. Remember. Fun fact, which is, I think, is something that I really liked, I really enjoyed, is in which he shared with me, was Stan's brother, David Garfield, was the keyboard player and musical director for 10-time Grammy winner George Benson for over 20 years. And Stan himself has hosted 2 house concerts every year since 2003. Do people know who George Benson is? He's an 80s,
Well, I hope so. He had a long
80s
run.
jazz player, jazz guitar player. I love his music. I like breezing. But anyway, I really like that. Anything to add to correct Stan with this short bio I gave, and a welcome
No,
message?
it was accurate. You asked about Compaq. The one company that people probably even remember less is Digital Equipment Corporation, but that's where I got my start in the computer industry, and that was at one time the second largest computer company behind only IBM, where Dave worked. So the fact that people today don't even remember it is an interesting fact.
The DEC VAX was outperformed the System 36 any day. So
Thank you.
If you want some time, I'll get into how knowledge management failed digital and why it no longer exists.
We can talk about that later. Okay.
Okay.
So now to Dave. So Dave, apart from his LinkedIn persona, Dave is the creator of the renowned Cynefin framework and originated SenseMaker. I did not know that this was the world's first distributed ethnography tool. Is that correct? AI
Yeah.
told me that. He is a lead author on managing complexity and chaos, and his work focuses on complex issues in strategy and organizational decision making for government and industry. Dave pioneered a science-based approach to organizations, drawing on anthropology, neuroscience, and complex adaptive systems theory. He is a passionate keynote speaker and recognized for his pragmatic cynicism and iconoclastic style. Do you agree? AI said that. Oh, okay. Fun fact.
Cynics are the ones who care in an organization. The Stoics are one who cave into CEOs.
Right. Fun fact. In addition to his work in complexity theory and organizational change, David is also an avid hiker, but so is Liam, I just discovered, and Stan too. In fact, Dave got his Camino certificate last year when he walked 128 kilometers walking the Camino de Santiago from Portugal. And he explained to me, and he had to explain it to me, that the Camino walk last year was a Welsh Finnish affair, meaning 50% Welsh, 50% Finnish. And so they called themselves last year the Sisu Dragons. And of course, I had to ask him to translate that. Translation: dragons represent whales. Sisu is a Finnish word with no direct English translation, but it is best described as a concept of stoic determination and grit. Anything to add, correct, violently object, Dave?
I'd add to Liam's description. I also grew up in a rural environment. My father was a vet. And the reason I decided to do theoretical physics and philosophy at university is he forced me out to do sheath washings on a Hereford bull in January in the freezing cold, being looked at and laughed at by Welsh farmers. And after that, I decided that wasn't a route for me. But
Thank you. Oh, that explains a lot. Never mind. Okay, so just before we get into the serious stuff, I just thought I'd set the tone of our conversation, because what I really wanted to replicate was a fun conversation, right? So may I ask our 3 guests to indulge me just by playing a little game of speed association questions? Just top of your head questions, and then no need to think much, and just, if you don't want to answer it, just say pass. Is that okay?
Okay. Sure.
Okay. First, favorite sandwich. Who wants to start?
beef and horseradish sauce.
Okay. Liam?
Ham and cheese.
Ham and cheese. Stan?
A pulled pork sandwich.
Pulled pork. Okay. First concert. Come on, guys.
First concert, 1970, Livingston Taylor, who was 20 years old at the time, Washington University in St. Louis.
I can't remember the date, but it was one of Cream's last performances.
Whose?
Cream. If you don't know Cream, you are really ignorant. It's where everything stands.
Sorry, Cream. I'll have to
He doesn't
Google
know
that.
about Cream. Oh my God.
I'll Google that. How do you
Ginger
spell that?
Baker, Eric Clapton, just don't. All right.
Great,
Sorry.
rock trio ever.
Of all time.
Okay, I learned something already. Liam, first concert.
An early concert of the Dubliners in Dublin.
Oh, okay. All right.
And if you don't know who the Dubliners are, you can leave now.
I heard that. Thank you. Aisle or window? Dave.
Oh, aisle all the time.
Okay. Stan?
Either one's fine with me.
Liam?
Window.
Window. Okay.
Yeah.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Cats understand complexity because they own their owners, yeah.
No.
People
Okay.
who own dogs want to control complexity.
Cats for me.
All right. Favorite animal?
Horses.
Hmm.
I'd go with
Raven.
cats again.
No, I'll
Okay.
go with ravens.
Ravens.
I know it in the mountains when I hear the ravens.
Okay. Is a raven one of your
It's also my
Totally
spirit animal. I've done a lot of work with indigenous people in North America, and it's my spirit animal as well. So, and I'm about to have a tattoo of a raven. My daughter has decided my 70th birthday means I've got to have a tattoo, so that's happening. It's going to be on my neck, I think. So,
Oh gosh.
I
Anyway,
say horses because I've ridden the winner of the Cheltenham Gold Cup,
show off. Yeah.
but not in the race.
horses. I love horses. They're elegant. Scariest animal.
Rhinoceros.
Rhinoceros. Okay.
Brazilian running spider. I will never forget my encounter with one of those.
Unfriendly dogs.
Unfriendly dogs. Okay. Okay, this one. Favorite smell.
Smoked meat.
Autumn leaves.
Leaving the kitchen at night.
Leaving the kitchen at night.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Does that mean you
Least
don't wash up the dishes, Liam? I'm just checking here, right?
No, we leave the refrigerator open.
least favorite smell.
Raw sewage.
Okay.
That lovely fruit that I ate in Singapore.
Oh, no, I'm on board with Liam. Durian is the worst
Oh,
experience I've ever
durian.
had in my life. Yeah.
Is that what you say?
Never
Durian?
again. Only once, and never. It took 3 days and 50 quarts of milk to get rid of the taste.
Hey, we have that in the
I'm on
Philippines
board with
too.
Liam there. Yeah.
Durian. We call it durian. 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 You say durian. Okay.
I call it something far worse. But
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. So, who have you asked an autograph from ever?
Wes Hall was my first one when he was fast bowler for West Indies against Glamorgan, and I was there at the match. Still the greatest fast bowler of all time.
Hmm.
I
Liam?
got the autograph of Detroit Tiger pitcher Denny McLain for my son when we were at spring training.
Okay.
Irish hurlers who won't mean anything to anybody.
Sorry, did you say Irish what? Sorry?
Hurlers. Game in Ireland.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Earliest memory.
My earliest memories are not of pleasant moments; they're of traumatic moments. So I won't fill you in on what happened, but
Mine is as well, actually. My sister was born 2 weeks early. And my father was a vet, so it wasn't a problem. It was easier than delivering cattle. But I got dumped on the staircase outside the door, and I can still remember every minute of that.
Actually, also probably had to do with cows when I almost got killed, but we survived.
Favorite person in the world, ever or right now?
Oh,
well, I'll mention a fellow that just died tragically last week. He's a folk singer by the name of Bob Franke. He was one of the gentlest, kindest people who wrote the most spiritual songs. We had the pleasure of having him perform in our house in 2009, and he had just moved out of the U.S. because he was unhappy with the environment here and moved to Guatemala, and he was tragically struck by a motorcycle. But at any rate, I'll name him.
I'll be more conventional. My mother made me what I am, and she died prematurely of lung cancer. So.
Oh,
yeah, I'm a big Gandhi fan.
Thanks.
We're getting to a post-colonial argument now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not get started. Okay, who do you admire or follow in the workplace right now?
Andy Clark, Manuel DeLanda, Nick Fox. But they're not in the workplace, they're academics, but their ideas apply to the workplace better than anything I've seen in the workplace.
Well, I'd say I admire people like Dave and Liam and other knowledge management colleagues. In my latest book, I just dedicated to a whole bunch of them that have been influences on me in my career.
I'd have to go for a good friend of mine, Philip Kotler, the marketing guru.
The marketing guru, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think happens when we die?
It's a transcendent moment, Nemes. I won't go further than that.
All right.
I'd second that.
And I've got a theological training, so I'm sticking to that. Yeah.
I don't know, and I'm not eager to find out.
Okay. If you
I thought I was going to the other day, hanging off a bloody cliff, trying to get down Courtly Crag, but that's another matter.
I'd like to pick your brain about that one time. So, what if you only have one song to sing for the rest of your life? What is it?
Calan Llan.
Pardon?
Calan Llan. It's a Welsh hymn. Sang at rugby matches, but it was also the most popular song in school. And it's really good at scaring off bears in the Rockies. I've never seen a bear while singing Calan Llan at full volume.
A song by Stan Rogers, the Mary Ellen Carter. Somebody once credited that song with helping him survive while he was in the water for a long time, and he kept singing that song, which was inspirational, kept him alive.
I'd go for the Fields of Athenry, which the Irish love to sing at rugby games.
Yeah, we've both gone for rugby songs. Yeah.
Thank you. You're going to have to spell that for me because I don't know these songs.
But we do argue in Wales that we sing it better than the Irish do, just to help them out. But
If only a rugby team was any damn good.
come on, we've had more Grand Slams in modern history than you have, mate.
Calan Llan. Thanks,
So
Skip.
just hold on that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, one last question. What is your favorite mantra or slogan for yourself?
Just say yes.
Don't have one.
Liam?
I'd have to say it's very simple. I didn't know that.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for your spontaneous answers to these questions. So now to the serious stuff. Let's start with my very first question. So a note for the audience. I have a few questions that I prepared, but please feel free to also ask your questions. I'm going to start with just three. And then if there's a question in between, please let us know. Just put it in the chat or raise your hand, and then we'll see. Okay? All right. So guys, throughout your careers, you've each been instrumental in shaping foundational concepts or tools in KM or strategic thinking. Can you pinpoint a specific aha moment or a problem you were trying to solve that led you to one of your most significant contributions? So for example, for Stan, what was your core problem you were trying to solve when you decided to focus on communities of practice or enterprise KM implementation?
In Digital's case, it's quite interesting that Digital had very successful communities of practice long before we even used the term knowledge management. I joined the company in 1983, and we already had what were called VAX Notes conferences, which were active, lively communities of practice. But unfortunately, those were identified because of the name VAX being in them. They were identified with being on the VAX platform. And when the world moved on to using personal computers, it was sort of assumed that was obsolete and it stopped being used. So when I started the first KM program at Digital in '96, the VAX Notes conferences were no longer active, even though they could have been. So my mission was to essentially rekindle communities such as we had successfully before, and using essentially a new platform, but one that would facilitate the same kind of interactions. And the expectation of the VAX Notes conferences had been that there was one for every important topic. There was also ones for social topics, like there was one for the New England Skiing Club and so forth. And that encouraged people to use them not only for work, but for hobbies and interests. And I thought that was a great idea because it got people used to using them and then it would transfer over to their business uses. So we worked on getting that going again, and eventually we had communities back to where they had been, but it was a lot of effort to do. And I think it's also a lesson that we've all seen KM programs that come and go, things get lost and have to be restarted. And that would be one example that communities had thrived, they were no longer thriving. I had to sort of reinstitute them.
But when did it become like a pivotal thing for you? When and that you wanted to, and then eventually it led you to do this
Well,
SAK
a
training?
pivotal thing occurred when I was at HP. So we went through the sequence of Digital was bought by Compaq, which was bought by HP. When I was leading things at HP, we had a tool we were using for community discussions that was called UBB Threads, and it wasn't really being used all that much. And the insight that I had was it was because it wasn't fully integrated with email, that people would have to go to a site in order to use it, and people wouldn't tend to do that. So we took the step of writing the code to integrate it with email so you could interact with it entirely that way. You could send a message and you could respond to it and you never have to visit a site. And once we did that, that really took off. So the pivotal moment for me was you've got to make these tools work in ways that the people will actually use, not assume that they're going to go visit your site because it's important. It's not to them, but can meet them where they're actually working.
So not assuming that people will actually use them and not assume things.
Not in the ways that you think they might. You have to meet them where they actually are. So even though people would decry that they get too much email, that's where you can usually rely on people. They will actually monitor their email. And so that's why we focused on integrating the discussions with email. And then after that, they really took off.
And when was this in your timeline to SIKM?
Well, this would have been around 2004, which was the year before SIKM was formed in 2005.
So that was a big contributing factor to creating SIKM.
SIKM came about because I was at an APQC conference in St. Louis, and I was asked to host a lunch session, which we called Birds of a Feather. I put up a sign on the table that said consulting and systems integration. That was the industry that I was in. And people were supposed to sit there if they were in that industry. We got about 8 people at that table. And after the lunch discussion was over, I said, "Do you want to continue the discussion?" And everybody said yes. I collected their business cards, and that was the origin of SIKM. The name actually came from the systems integration part of it, even though we no longer have any emphasis on that industry. That's where the name originated.
Okay, all right. Going to you, Liam, how do you get to your niche of, if I'm not mistaken, it's designing custom intelligence and insight workshops. Is that correct?
That'll do for the moment.
Okay.
I'll take you back to the early 1980s when I was a professor at the Kellogg School at Northwestern. And by the way, 4 of my colleagues have gone on to win the Nobel Prize in Economics. Okay, tells you how much of a misfit I was at Kellogg. But I was watching these students do all kinds of analysis, and I was doing consulting work with a couple of firms. And there was very elaborate frameworks of analysis that were being created with all kinds of outputs, okay? And I started asking myself a very simple question, okay? What's the new understanding that these people are creating and what are its implications? In other words, what meaning are they creating? And I could never get a good answer from anybody because we're doing analysis, we're creating output, somebody needed, somebody asked us for this, we got to do it, we have a timeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the meaning of their work was lost on them. And I began to define meaning as the implication, the new understanding created in analysis and its implications. And note the 2 parts, new understanding and its implications, which I began to define as insight. And so the whole focus of my work since then has been around generating and using insight defined as new understanding and its implications. Implications for thinking, decision-making, and action. It was a very simple notion at the time. I didn't quite fully understand its implications for the work and the rest of my life, culminating in a book done a couple of years ago on the new insight perspective or new insight. And that started from a very simple set of discussions in which I couldn't get any simple answer to a concept that I thought was really obvious, which is what is the meaning? What's the output of the work you're doing?
And when you start having these kinds of conversations, what do you say with people who were saying, well, why do we even have to have this conversation? What do you tell them?
Well, people are products of their environment. So if you're dealing with a lot of MBAs who've been schooled in analytical methods, their whole focus is executing the analytical methods with surprising little attention to the output and its consequences. That may seem like a very strange observation, but I think if you walked around in organizations for as long as we have, and many of the people listening to us, you'll know exactly what I mean. And by the way, I'm seeing the same thing now with AI.
Okay. Maybe I'll get back to you later after that. So we'll deep dive into that later. Dave, your turn. Your turn. What challenge were you addressing at the time when you developed Cynefin or
I wasn't.
SenseMaker? Oh, you weren't.
That's not the way you do things, all right? I mean, the way I work is there's a whole range of issues or problems or things which interest you. And there's a whole range of reading that you do. So I work with the natural sciences and with the humanities. Then there's one day where it all kind of like comes together, generally when you're teaching. I mean, it's normally a sort of 6, 7 year distillation process. I never understand why academics don't want to teach because that's where I think you get the most personal learning, right? So things like Cynefin, things like RAS, things like Esterine have all started off on a flip chart in front of a client. Yeah, but they've had a sort of 6, 7 year history behind them before they come together. Right? So that's kind of like I don't buy the problem solution linear focus. Right? I think related to that is I still remember when I got the freedom in IBM to check into a lot of the management books. And this is early days KM. We went with all of what the big consultancies said they did on KM. Whenever I sent in ethnographers to investigate reality, it had no correspondence whatsoever with what was said in the case studies. Right? And that made me very, very cynical about case studies. And then it got worse because in order to provide for my top cover, I survived in IBM through top cover, I had to fill out the surveys for academics asking what IBM's opinion was on things. So that was my price. I was hosted in marketing. So after about 3 months, I gave up in despair because it was a nightmare. So I got my children to fill them in at random in return for their pocket money. So for the next 3 years, every academic survey, which included material about IBM's attitude, was based on random entry from my children. And when I owned up to this at a market research conference in Nice, I think they wanted to have me killed. And I pointed out I got a naive agent to fill him in at random. So it was more statistically accurate than me getting false information in the first place. And they're still worried about that. So I think that cynicism comes in, all right, that I don't believe case studies. I do believe there's enough coherence in natural science for us to rely on it. So that's been our approach. And also reality matters. I remember working with Jet Promotion Labs and they'd had the classic approach to narrative, which I really hate, which you bring in journalists or experts to curate narratives. They capture them, they codify them, they put them on databases. And the curation is a nightmare because they decide what are relevant. If you want an example, go to the Anthropology Museum at Wharton College, which is full of people capturing native stories and freezing them in time and putting them in documents. And they had this huge database and nobody was using it. You know, it was kind of like KM, we got all these stories, isn't it wonderful? And we asked people why they didn't and said, why would I go and read something by some boring old fart which isn't relevant to the modern day? But if the boring old fart gave a lunchtime lecture, everybody turned up to listen. Yeah, they wanted to interact with the real person and hear the oral story. The written stuff didn't have the life to it, the ability to respond to an audience. And I think one of the things we then started to do with SenseMaker was to try and recreate the oral tradition by giving people the power to curate their own stories rather than have them curated by experts. So that was kind of like a turning point. Normally, when you get really angry about something, that's when you have your best ideas. I find anger is a powerful motivator to change.
So the kinds of problems that people ask you to help them with, or not people, organizations ask you to help them with are like what?
Oh, well, let's take an example. We've been working recently to try and capture knowledge across a very complex problem. And we've created something we originally did with Navarre in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which is a sacred storybook. So gather stories from all the people in the organization, but then select based on the way they've interpreted the stories rather than what I want to say is important. We algorithmically select based on the way they've interpreted their own stories. And then we put them into a book with graphics, and that's called a sacred storybook. Now, people thought that was a good idea, but what it actually did, it provided a much better briefing document for new staff and incoming commanders. So an incoming commander would spend hours reading that book, but he wouldn't spend 5 minutes reading a briefing document. So the narrative conveys more complex ideas. We've got if anybody's interested, there's a big launch event on 6th of November on that. Yeah, with some of the work we've been doing in Europe lately. So I think generally we get called in there's two reasons we get called in. One is people are curious about the ideas, so they want to find a way to play with them. That's classic early adopter market. It's like, this stuff is fascinating. Can we find something to work on it with you? If you've got a defined problem, go to a big consultancy. The other one, which we're sort of increasingly seeing, is people are saying, look, I've been trying to solve this problem for years with conventional techniques and it doesn't work. We call those intractable problems. Can you do anything? Right? So, one of the things we're looking at the moment, for example, is measuring human attitudes in a quantified form for drug trials. Because we know, for example, that attitudes make a huge difference, not only on drug trials, but for example, on oncology. And we have a method of measuring attitudes at scale in quantitative form with backup narrative. So to be quite honest, when you do novel things, you tend to find problems which match the solution as much as you deal with problems which want a solution. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask Liam and Stan if they had any comments to that, or I wanted to also ask them the same question. What kind of situations do you do organizations hire you for? For example, Liam, for example.
It's really very simple in my case, not too different to Dave actually. People are searching for a new understanding of the world around them, okay, and looking for a new way to approach it. And where we come in is helping them to build an intelligence capability inside the organization to redefine some of the problems they're dealing with and new ways of addressing those problems, which very often are not the standard ways of attacking them. So
I have a question about that, because when you say new, a lot of people are resistant to new. Maybe the top people want new, but the people below do not want new. So how do you attack that?
That's because they know it won't work and they've had enough of new things every 2 years. That's why.
So how do you deal with that?
Give you an example. We were developing different kinds of scenarios for an organization, and a senior executive, probably the third ranked person in the organization, this is a multi-billion-dollar firm, came in and said, look, we can't do scenarios around here. We said, why? We tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work. So we said, okay, we're just going to call them competitive futures, and continued on. We just dropped the word scenario. Once we started talking about competitive futures, what they might look like, what their implications might be, where the opportunities might reside, what kinds of new problems they would confront, how they'd have to change their organization to deal with them, continued on regardless, as long as we didn't use the word scenario.
Can I challenge you on that again? Because competitive futures, I can just think of my former organization. They do not like those kinds of terms. It does not belong to our vocabulary. What do you say about those kinds of comments?
Well, once we're working with people and they understood what we meant by competitive future, there was no problem. People really got stuck in. And you're asking people to go away and create what the world might look like 5 years out in and around their industry. And then tracing back where would the opportunity reside if you were in that world.
There's a really good point being made here that you have to fit in with the language of the group you're working with. You can't take people too far too fast. And Liam and I have an unnatural advantage here because we were the English first colony and the Irish were the second colony. So we've had to learn ways to explain things to people in powerful positions to survive for centuries. So it's built in our blood. But I have no problem in using different words for people if it makes them comfortable. Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead, Liam.
That's a real issue Dave has just pointed out. It's managing the comfortability quotient of people you're working with.
Yeah.
And sometimes how they describe that is very different in the actual case. People can get very comfortable with new words, new terminology, new concepts, once they understand what their meaning is.
And maybe that's the operation, the word there. It's once they understand what it means, because usually it's the language that you use to explain things is what's important too, right? Or not? Because or not?
You also use metaphor. I mean, the children's party
Well,
story
yeah,
did
right,
more to get Cynefin across than anything else I've ever done. Yeah, so stories and metaphor explain things, but if you don't change people's language, you never change the way they think. Yeah, so
okay,
you have to get the balance right. If you don't make some changes in the language they're using, you will not change the way they see the world.
right. Stan, I wanted to ask you two thoughts.
When people tend to approach me nowadays, it's usually some kind of private communication where they'll ask me if they can pick my brain or they can spend 30 minutes chatting about something. And there's lots and lots of these requests. Um, I generally respond to those by asking them if they have a question to ask it in the SICAM leaders community. I'd rather that they do that. And some of the time they will do that. A lot of the time they won't. It's interesting to me. I think it reflects something on our field of knowledge management that we aren't necessarily very good at practicing knowledge management ourselves. We may be trying to get our organizations to do certain things that we ourselves won't do. So, for instance, asking them to ask in a community, that's something they ought to probably be doing in their own organizations, but it's tough when it comes to them doing it. So we're no different really as a KM community than the people at large that we're trying to serve. But if I have success where they will go and ask it there, then I'll tell them two things. One, you'll get more answers and better answers necessarily than just talking to me. And two, lots of other people will benefit from seeing that exchange. So that's really one of the main benefits of community. So that's what I continuously do.
So we don't practice what we preach.
We don't do a good job of it in many cases. That's
We
right.
can do better.
We can do better.
Right. So my next question, and maybe we can go back to what you've also said previously. When you're trying to launch a new KMID or a strategy to your clients, what was your biggest obstacle? And what is your relationship to failure?
Well, the typical obstacle that you run into is just resistance to change, right? But that's number one. So if you say we're going to introduce a new initiative, no one ever is excited to hear that, right? They're usually the opposite. So it has to be done in a way that doesn't feel like it's that dramatic a change. It has to be perceived as something that's desirable, that they'll get a benefit. There was once a claim made that any new technological innovation had to be 10 times better than its predecessor for anyone to adopt it. But if you think about that in general, you have to offer something that people could relate to and say, yeah, if I do that, that'll actually make my life easier versus I'm going to do that because someone's telling me to do it. So many of the initiatives fail right away because they're viewed as technology rollouts and things like that, and people resist them. So to me, it has to get back to doing something where it's very quickly perceived that the people will benefit from it rather than they're just implementing something you're pushing on them.
Okay. Liam, Dave?
My problem has always been, to be honest, been KM people. I mean, when I did an extensive study in IBM, which produced the second major Cynefin article, which is, I think now one of the top 10 cited papers of all time, the first to introduce complexity. We identified that there were 64 informal communities to every one formal community in IBM. And we said, so why don't we create environments in which the informal communities can thrive and ways in which we can find them when we need to? And IBM's chief knowledge officer said, how do I make them formal? I've never forgotten that. And then we came to have IBM's approach to KM. This was always worrying, all right? So IBM had two people, Larry Prusik and myself, who had some international reputation. And so when they decided to create IBM's approach to knowledge management, we were both initially invited. I was then uninvited because I was considered disruptive. And Larry was allowed to give a 10-minute presentation before he was sent away. And this bunch of MBAs produced IBM's approach to KM based on platitudes. And then they sent us a slide set, and they didn't know us. They said, if you have to use these slides when you present KM. And both of us said, don't worry, if we use slides, we'll use them. Neither of us ever use slides. So they hadn't considered that possibility. But you can see it in the modern age as well. I was having a fight with somebody on LinkedIn today who I actually think I'm getting really worried about his ethics because he thinks AI, it can actually create tacit knowledge and can transform business. And it's the same mistake KM keeps making. It doesn't just focus on information, it focuses on text. And AI can always synthesize text better than humans, but it's such a limited concept of humanity that it's problematic. But that concept has taken over KM, and most of my time is fighting that, you know, or trying to get people not to talk about KM. We work on decision support. We work on innovation because KM destroys those two in its current form.
Before I get to my next question, Liam.
Let me put a little different twist on this. I've become a very big believer of neuroscience. Spent a lot of time reading it over the last 10 years. And one of my big takeaways is that it's impossible to disaggregate thinking, behaviors, and action.
Yeah.
Those three are so intimately integrated, we cannot
With the body as well.
Okay? And so what I spent a lot of time doing in the early stages of engagement is reading the emotional state of the people I'm working with, by which I mean, how do you feel about the assignment? How do you feel about the organization? How do you feel about yourselves? And those emotions, when you get them externalized, explain a lot about the reaction of people to any initiative, to any engagement, to how they talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. It took me a while to figure this out, but once I latched onto it, it really, really helps me to see what's happening behind the veil curtain.
And so how did you even get to there? Because at least sometimes some people think that emotions, well, at least a lot when I was still working, emotions didn't have a place in the workplace. Suffer in silence, basically, isn't true. At least 3 years ago, that was maybe not 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but now it's much more acceptable to be conscious of other people's employees' feelings. So how did you get them to think that way?
Well, let me back into that. There can't be a more absurd statement in organizational life than somebody saying, let's take emotion out of this. Okay. In other words, let's become automatons. Now, people react to that observation very, very differently, because some people still want to do so. I mentioned my friends who became Nobel laureates. I think if you gave the four of them a question, what is emotion, they could not answer it. It never occurs to them. They've never faced it. They've never looked at it as an analytical task, as something to be explored. Okay. So once you get in and you investigate emotion by never using the word.
Oh, okay. Never using the word. All right.
Yeah. So you just ask people, how are you feeling about this? Okay. How does that make you feel, etc. And most importantly, from an emotion point of view, is how are they feeling about themselves in that context at that time? So when an engineer tells me, for example, I feel that this assignment is really absurd, or this assignment cannot lead to any good outcomes, okay, or I feel very, very encumbered by having to work with these people who cohabitate in marketing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get a real sense of the emotional context and background that you're dealing with. And unless you're willing to deal with that directly and take it head on, you're DOA, dead on arrival.
And I put a slightly different twist on that. I'm not sure we disagree, but I'd put a slightly different twist on it. I think the sort of emotion, reason, mind, body, these are dualisms, left, right brain. These are all things which have no scientific background whatsoever. Everything is actually mixed up and congealed, but we like dichotomies in North Atlantic society. It's a sort of inheritance of Manichaeism. Reality is, I mean, our approach is slightly different. We try and get people to work together in smaller combinations on small projects. So, for example, putting somebody who's just joined the company together with somebody who's about to retire from the company, together with somebody who's on the fast track management cycle. And we'll show 10 or 5 of those trios that say, how do you solve innovation in this organization? So we're building what's called a transgenerational pair that links in with brain plasticity with power. Yeah, but we're linking it at a level of granularity where you can get change. So I would tend to see things like emotion, reason as emergent properties of the way people act together, and I prefer to get people to do that at scale. I think we're agreement on the principle, I think, but there's different methods and ways of doing that. And that, by the way, is the most effective way of gathering knowledge from people who are about to retire. They'll tell somebody who's just joined the company what they know, but they won't tell a KM professional.
Agree.
Which sort of takes us into this whole world of tacit versus explicit.
Oh yeah, God,
Uh,
bane of my bloody life. That is.
yeah, there cannot be another topic in the face of humanity around which more garbage has been written than around tacit knowledge.
Everybody forgets. Polanyi says very clearly, no explicit knowledge can exist without a strong tacit component. And Nanaka doesn't quote that. I mean, all went wrong with Nanaka. That Seki model was a total disaster for KM, along with the DIKW one. Those are the two models that launched 1,000 failed knowledge management initiatives.
Concur entirely.
Well,
But
go. Yeah,
the
sorry. Go.
sad thing is that those things continue to be replicated. They keep appearing. We can't seem to kill them off.
I did get Nanaka once in Singapore to agree that it only really applied to Japanese manufacturing industry, and he was quite surprised people had taken it outside that context. I mean, Nanaka was a delightful old guy, all right, and he was quite realistic about that.
Well, just to be clear, because that was one of my questions about this nonsense stuff that you thought were workplace think that you consider nonsense. What exactly is unacceptable here for in terms of in that particular subject? What's
You're dumbing
unacceptable
down
there?
humans.
Sorry, that.
It's that the danger with AI, all right, is not that AI will exceed us in intelligence, because for a start, it isn't intelligent. It's just algorithmic induction. The danger is we dumb ourselves down to only do what AI can do better. The reason the big consultancies have got a problem at the moment is all they've ever done is synthesize documents, and AI will always do that better.
Hmm.
So as a general principle, anything AI can currently do better than your staff shouldn't have been doing it in the first place.
Okay. So instead, what should be done in your mind?
Link and connect people. I just give you an example. Build
Okay.
informal networks, link and connect people, move back to a semi-oral tradition. I'll tell you now, civil engineers transmit more knowledge in stories told over a cup of tea at end of shift than they ever do in a knowledge management system. And you have to, and that's where we develop methods to capture them. Yeah, people learn, it can take 5 or 10 years in an apprentice model for your body and your brain to learn things to the point where you can execute them. All right. So, KM has destroyed itself by becoming a subset of IT
Mhm.
processing text.
Okay. Liam, what is unacceptable today in workplace thinking? That's nonsense to you.
There's a couple of things. One is the presumption that as you go up the hierarchy, you know more and more.
Mm.
I really question that, because you have to have a topic around knowledge. So I'm dealing with some people who are quote unquote heads of sales, and now they're heads of marketing. The transition from head of sales to head of marketing is a very substantial one. But if you bring the whole mentality and mindset of head of sales into head of marketing, it's not going to work. Can't work. So you look at people who are CFOs who become CEOs. Okay. It's a heck of a transition from one to the other. Okay. Unless you're willing to deal with the mindset complications from the perspective of the CEO, which are fundamentally different than the perspective of the CFO, you're just not going to work. I mean, I tell this story, I won't name the company, of the new CEO of a very large company who made a statement in front of 700 or 800 people. I don't need to talk to customers to understand how and why customers are behaving as they do. And contemplate that statement for a moment.
Hmm.
And I said to the person sitting beside me, this person will last 12 months in this company. I was wrong. He lasted 9, because he wasn't willing to learn the culture of the company, okay, which was very much a customer-centric driven company.
Isn't it also true, though, that Liam, sometimes people go up not because of their people skills, but because of their technical skills. So that way, as they go up, they manage more, but they don't have a clue about culture, as you say, people managing and all that, because they're all experts in a very technical field. So it also, I mean, it sort of aligns that with your idea that they become terrible leaders or terrible managers.
Yeah. I've gone out on a major limb a few times. I've asked people in a company to buy the book, The Double Helix, and to
Mhm.
read it very, very carefully and think about it. The double helix was how Crick and Watson discovered DNA. Okay. The whole process of discovery doesn't follow rules very often. And the principles and rules that we have get in the way of creating and leveraging knowledge.
It's also where aesthetics come in. We know the role of aesthetics in human evolution is to allow us to be innovative. Because, I mean, I got some of my best ideas for Cynefin looking at Caravaggio's paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I got the concept of liminality. So metaphor, abstraction are key aspects of human evolution that you can't replicate in an algorithm on silicon, right? But you can destroy humans' capability of doing them. That's why I get passionate about this. If we go 2 or 3 more generations like this, we're going to lose human reasoning capability.
Mm. Stan.
Well, I've got a number of feelings about our field in general. I feel as though we've not made a lot of progress over the 30 years that I've been doing CAM. It seems like we're still sort of tackling the same things. Um, we've got sort of a cyclical nature to our field where programs come and go. Ones that have success are nonetheless eliminated, then they have to start up again. I feel as though just meant bringing up DIKW, there's many different things like that that are sort of fads that people latch onto that aren't based on anything. Um, there's certification is another constant one that people keep asking. I need to get certified in knowledge management, and then we've had some questions here. What's the counter argument? Well, I've written extensively about these things, and you can read and get the collective wisdom of many other people like Dave and Liam as well in responding to those. But nonetheless, none people keep grabbing onto this stuff. So it's almost like we don't learn anything ourselves. The field goes along, but we keep kind of falling into the same traps. And that's, to me, a concern that we're not really making much progress.
And I've seen the KM cycle. I mean, it started in 95. Yeah, that's when it came. There's still a fun argument you can have. I remember when Bob Buckman and Larry Prusak and I got together and I just watched them fight over who really started it, all right? But one of the strengths of KM is it came from many backgrounds. So you had Larry and Tom working from information management. You had Leif Edvardson from intellectual capital management. You had Gordon Petras from IP. It wasn't a single origin theory. It got catalyzed by Nanaka's book, The Knowledge Creating Company, but it existed in many forms before. I've been working on decision support for years, then it got inherited on that. And in the early days of KM, it was a board level appointment. Just remember that. We're talking about director level appointment. But then what happened is the growth of scalable computing computing took off at the same time as KM. So KM became associated with written text in computer systems. And it was almost impossible to break people away from that. And that's been the pattern which continued. So it was let's create a taxonomy, which rhymes with taxidermy, by the way. So just think about that. Yeah, so create a taxonomy, create a community of practice, and nobody looked at levels of abstraction in those. They just created them for common groups. Then magically everything will happen. And of course it doesn't. So the minute you get an economic downturn, the KM team is actually killed off. They then go and become a consultancy firm to sell to the next generation of KM people what failed the first time round. And that's literally true, right? But the need for managing knowledge comes back. So people start again, but they repeat exactly the same mistake. And I think 3, 4, 5 times we've seen that now. And now with AI, it's coming in even worse. Yeah.
So what
And by the
working?
way, I think anybody who talks about wisdom management should be taken out and garroted for the sake of humanity.
Tell me about that. What is that?
Oh, there is a thing called wisdom management. There's a whole literature on it now, right?
Oh,
And,
okay.
and I satirized it once. There was a guy, he was at the KM conference. He was from Anglian Water. And he said he had gone beyond of those of us on KM. He was now managed the first ever practitioner of wisdom management. So the next time I was on a conference, I created a 5-level triangle, which went data, information, knowledge, wisdom, eschatological realization, and did a 40-minute speech about eschatological realization as a self-actualizing capability of autonomous humans. And I was just full of jargon. And for 2 years, he pursued me to come and talk about eschatological realization to his board until he discovered I'd been satirical, right? And a lot of people in KM don't have a good sense of humor. They take themselves far too seriously.
And then one step beyond that, when I wrote my article about DIKW, there was some, I didn't even have the pyramid with another level called enlightenment. So
Yeah,
Dave, wait for
somebody actually
enlightenment
created a
management.
15-level hierarchy from that in Australia. I still remember it.
But surely a lot of this conversation reverts back to a simple question. What's the purpose of managing knowledge?
Hmm.
Which
And I think
never,
that's simple. It's to improve decision making and to create the conditions for innovation. I think that's what it's about. But everybody loses that focus. They think you manage knowledge for its own sake, and the way you manage knowledge is to do what everybody told you to do at KM World. Sorry, I've keynoted at every KM World since it started, all right, which is a bit depressing if you think about it. Yeah, and every year it's the same bloody statement, all right? There's maybe one or two people challenging the orthodoxy of it has to be in text and it has to be searched by algorithms.
No, I
So Dave,
completely. Sorry, go
question
ahead.
for you, Dave. So you've been keynoting every year, you've been presenting workshops for every year, and you get a lot of rapt attention. People come to your sessions in volume. Do you feel as though that it's not having the impact that you'd like it to have?
It's starting to now. I mean, Simon Wardley and I were talking about this the other day. New ideas take 20, 30 years to break through. They don't break through overnight. What you have to do is be consistent, be honest, and don't worry. I mean, if I'd given in to people who wanted me to say complexity thinking is a subset of systems thinking, I'd have been far more popular, but I wouldn't get the presence I've got now. So I think you need to be honest. You need to actually keep saying the same things, and you need to wait because sooner or later the world moves. And the world is moving at the moment. I mean, we got the EU to fund us to write a handbook on complexity. That would never have happened before COVID. Trump has made people more than aware that the world is inherently uncertain and that knowledge has to be a dynamic capability. So, for example, we've just launched something which mimics the swarming behavior of bees.
Mm.
So you can create knowledge in real time over 2 or 3 hours based on a current problem rather than spend weeks or months in consultation. And all of our work has been, like informal networks. You don't worry about managing the knowledge, you manage the ability to create and for knowledge to flow. Yeah, because if you codify knowledge, it's static at a point in time. And if KM just focused on methods to create knowledge in real time and methods to allow knowledge to flow in very short cycles, they'd be in a much better place.
So if you were
but
to prioritize aspects of knowledge management, the capturing, the retention, the organized structure, that's all secondary. The first aspect of knowledge
I'd
management
forget
is
all of
most
that. Larry Prusak got it right. I mean, Larry Prusak got a lot right. Right? Liam and I both knew him. Yeah? And so did Stan. And we won't go into his tribute, but Stan and I know what we think about some of that, right? But he said if you got $1 to spend on knowledge management, send a cent on the technology and 99 cents on the people.
the people.
Right? And that was profound. I think linking and connecting people at scale, you want everybody to be within 2 phone calls of everybody else in the organization based on a trust network. And you can do that in 18 months. All right. If that's the case, knowledge will flow quickly when it's needed. You don't have to worry about what the knowledge is. You know it will flow.
but
Well,
that takes me
picking
back to
up
that.
on that, don't have to worry about the knowledge. This whole fascination with tacit and explicit, and people go on and on about it. It's not important, right? It's what you just said,
Mm.
Dave. It's getting knowledge flowing, not talking about which kind of knowledge it is.
Yeah.
Liam, you wanted to say something?
Well, that takes me back again to the purpose of this whole effort on KM. I'm always fascinated to listen to KM conversations and hear nothing about the outside of the organization. There is that thing outside called customers,
Mm.
and there is that thing called the purpose of an organization is to create and sustain customers. Because if you don't do that, it's all for naught. Okay. So this necessity to link what we talk about in KM with the existence of customers and creating and sustaining customers over time, that's the linkage that very often gets almost no observation, no attention inside organizations under the umbrella of KM. That I find incredibly frustrating.
To support that, one of the best KM programs I did is I took the board of one of the British major supermarkets, yeah, and put them as counter clerks in a building society stroke bank. And I took the directors of the bank and put them as shelf stackers in the supermarket. Yeah, did that for a week. They came back, they said they learned more in that week than they'd learned in years of management education.
I
Because
walked
I put
into
them in contact with real customers on the ground floor in an environment they were not familiar with, which meant we created, and this is cognitive neuroscience, we created so many anomalies they had to think about it.
yeah. I'll
And
give you
people
another.
don't think unless you create
Yeah.
anomalies.
I'll give you another case around that. I walked into a very, very well-known hotel, actually in Canada, and the doorman that I saw walking in, I did a double take, teeth fell out of my mouth, went in, registered, came back out. Who was the doorman? The CFO of the company.
Mm.
Okay. I asked him, what the hell are you doing here? He said, I'm learning about customers. I'm learning
Medieval
about.
kings used to do it. Once a year, they used to go out and go into the pubs and drink dressed as ordinary people. And I remember working for Jan Letchley when he was CEO of SmithKline Beecham. We created a virtual environment in which there were multiple avatars, and everybody knew that some of them were Lang Yatchley, but nobody knew which ones. And so he heard things he wouldn't have heard through conventional methods.
Well, yeah.
But don't you need unconventional leaders for those kinds of situations too, though? Because normal managers would not think like you. So how do you,
You've got a separate problem here. First of all, a significant amount of managers have got no actual experience. They did a BA in business studies, an MBA from an elite business school, became a consultant, and then moved sideways into management. And that's a disaster. That's something that Frederick Taylor argued strongly against. You need to have apprentice models for management and apprentice models for learning. So the problem is if you think like a consultant, you don't want to break the norm. Yeah, managers who really are confident about their position will take risks. And to be quite honest, the real problem is middle management, not really top level management. C-level have the grief.
yeah.
Yeah. Nanaka famously, one of the great things Nanaka said was middle bottom up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no point in selling bottom up or top down until you convince middle management you can't get anywhere. When we do knowledge mapping, we focus entirely on real world short-term problems faced by middle management. Because if we can make a difference to that, then we can get adoption.
But isn't that where the pain point is? It's the middle management because they have their own territories, they have their ways
And
of
that's my
working.
point. So we map things that are keeping them awake at night against knowledge assets, and we end up with lots of little knowledge programs. I mean, that's what I teach every year at KM World, yeah, and it's got picked up. Yeah, until you get middle managers convinced that you're doing the right thing, you will not survive the next downturn. You do not want to be the CEO's pet project. That's deadly in any organization.
So what strategy have you used to actually convince middle management to do that, to take risks like that?
Oh, it's simply by finding the problems which are keeping them awake at night and offering them small scale, low risk solutions. The things which motivate people are reduced cost and reduced personal risk, not risk to the company, but risk to them. You need to keep thinking about that. Can I reduce cost and can I reduce personal risk for the decision maker? Those are the decision points.
Okay. I want to give some time for the others to talk, to ask questions too. Sorry, Liam, did you want to say something before
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time with middle and senior middle managers, and two issues keep popping up over and over again. Number one, they don't have time to think. They're so busy doing. They're so busy involved. I've got one client right now that I'm working with every week, and she told me last week, look, just looked at my calendar. I've got 1/2 hour next week that I can spend with you to discuss these issues. 1/2 hour open on a week-long calendar. And I said to her, well, how about that 6 p.m. when you're driving home? No, I've got a call scheduled then. So if you don't have time to sit back and reflect, just think about it. Okay. You're so busy getting things done, quote unquote, that you're actually not getting things done.
And meaningless things as well. I mean, we did a study of IBM general managers. So these are very expensive people.
Yeah.
They were spending 80% of their time online authorization of actions. So they had to employ other people to do their strategic thinking for them. It's really depressing when you move into the bureaucracy of a large organization.
And then the second problem is that they see themselves as solving problems, not in asking questions. And so if you're not asking questions, you can't learn, you can't motivate other people, you can't direct people in different directions. So you become just a functionary in the organization. And nobody that I know in middle or senior middle managers wants to be merely a functionary.
Speaking
The
about,
same
oh,
thought has
go ahead.
come to me about the fact that, like, just to take the time to attend this session today as an example, looks like we had somewhere between 30 and 40 participants. And out of the vast population of people in the field, that's a relatively small percentage. And the same thing is true for many of the other events that are held in our monthly SICAM calls and so forth. And I always wonder, like, what are people doing in that time instead of learning or thinking, as Liam says? And it's probably some mundane bureaucratic task that they nonetheless perceived as, I got to do that, that's more important, versus allowing themselves to spend an hour or an hour and a half to think and to learn. It seems that's a challenge that I don't think we've ever overcome.
I think a lot of people confuse busyness with productivity. Do you agree?
Let me give you a case in point that really had a massive impact on me. Again, I won't name the business, but walking down the corridor of an office with the vice chairman of the company, and what do we hear but snoring coming from an office? Guy is snoring at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, right? And this macho vice chairman says, that guy is fired. Get his ass out of here right now. Done deal. VP of HR who was with us said, well, wait a moment. That's a very important person. Response, I don't care how important he is. Get his ass out of here. Junior person says to him, that particular person has created 17 elements in this organization known as sources of innovation that has led to somewhere in the order of $25 billion in sales of this company. Response to the vice chairman, well, can't somebody get him a goddamn pillow put under his head?
That's not bad.
I mean, that story to me classified everything you need to know about the impact of hierarchy, the ability to make decisions quickly which turn out to be wrong, and above all, not listening to people below you.
And you can have good people. I mean, there was a director of Boeing I knew and worked with, Dennis, I mean, this is when Boeing was run by engineers, not by management consultants, which puts it back a few decades. And he used to hold a 1 week offsite thing for himself and his senior managers. They weren't allowed mobile phones. If any of them phoned the office, they were fired because they were obviously incompetent because their deputies couldn't do their job. And he brought in people like me with instructions to make their brains hurt. And that was a great guy. He actually really thought. He created space for thinking and he made it part of the ritual. And I think rituals are things we've been missing in organizations. We've allowed people to be consumed by bureaucracy. Again, one of the things we're looking at the moment is the ability for people to be allowed to spend money without applying for a grant to do it. There's a big problem with venture capitalists at the moment. They only give money to things which have looked like things which succeeded before. So one of the things we've been developing is to say, well, how can I say, well, I'll put 1% of the budget onto a thing where anybody can play with this money and we have controls on that and we'll see what works and we'll fund what works, not what people say will work. Now, we can take out 50% of the bureaucracy of a company with that. And I think you need to remember most of the current problems with organizations came out of the adoption of systems thinking in the 1980s. In the most popular forms of business process reengineering and Sengi's disastrous learning organization. That's where it all went wrong. Yeah, because it moved into this engineering metaphor of the firm. Yeah, and it moved away from the military metaphor which preceded, which is adaptive. In military metaphors, you spend more time training than you do executing, and you have apprentice models of learning, you have role-based decision making, not individual-based decision making. And there's a huge amount we could go back to very quickly if we just got rid of the bureaucratic control mechanisms which came out of this so-called systemic engineering approach, which is disastrous for anything which involves ambiguity.
I wanted to give people time to ask their question. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question? I know there's a lot of activity in the chat box. Yes, Rocio?
Yes, I'll be very happy to pick on your brains. You know, in the current context in the humanitarian world, we have a very massive downsizing. So I have two concerns. I'm doing a research on how knowledge retention is being happening in this specific context. And, you know, we go from USAID suddenly disappearing all sources of work to all of a sudden 7,000 people going outside the door. So we are in a moment in which we have the baby boomers leaving. We don't have face-to-face working session as before, especially the post-pandemic has brought the new generations who prefer to stay more time working from home when they can. At the same time, all these massive downsizings created a fear for those who are remaining. And you have at the same time, that has obviously created a very bad atmosphere. So people really make the best just to show up to meetings and disappear. So the face-to-face is very little happening. And then you have AI, which is supposed to be the savior of all the knowledge retention to some heads. So you talk to some leaders and they basically, the first thing you cut is KM because they don't understand what KM is. Secondly, you let people go because AI will retain all that knowledge. And we are letting go so much knowledge and expertise and skills and know-how that we cannot even count. So
There's
anyway,
two things on that which are important. One is don't confuse KM groups being collapsed by CEOs with the need to retain knowledge. Yeah. KM groups get collapsed because nobody's seen any benefit from them in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's the problem. Yeah. Because they keep saying people what they want people to do rather than helping solve real world problems. There is something else though. AI is driving this desire for downsizing. I remember seeing that with business process re-engineering. To give a really practical example, we're working with one of the big pharmaceutical companies at the moment, not represented on this panel, Barry, all right, but you're welcome to adopt the project. Where we basically said, look, if you lay these people off because you think they can be replaced by AI, and you turn out to be wrong, you've got a disaster on your hands because you can't recover. You can't go back. All right. And the AI bubble is starting to burst. If you haven't seen the literature, it's really starting to burst. So what we're saying is, well, why don't we discover all the things that they know, their hobbies, their original education, the things they're fascinated by, which you're not using, and find ways to use that for the company while you try and see whether you can automate what they did before. But then you haven't lost them and you've probably found new value. And I think that's a much more positive approach. We're saying, let's find out all the things these people could do for the company, which they're not, which is a missed opportunity. Now, I'm not saying people won't do downsizing, but just telling people they shouldn't ain't going to work, and telling people the knowledge management function is vital ain't going to work. I've been to C-level, all right? You get 3 or 4 minutes to make decisions. That's how long you get to make decisions. So you can't really listen to reason. You're just going with flows and patterns. So you have to create a different atmosphere. And that's sort of, well, I don't want to lay people off. I'm playing to the risk and cost factor there. The cost of re-employing those people will be a fortune. The risk of it going wrong is high. Therefore, why don't we do this simple audit? And we can run that audit in a week. Yeah.
Stan or Liam, do you have something to add to that?
Well, the idea that you're going to use AI to replace knowledge obviously is not going to work. That's not where most of the knowledge resides anyway. So you can replicate things. So the idea that somehow the tools that are being advocated that can look at your documents or look at your chats and somehow learn something meaningful from that, to me, I'm skeptical about that. So you let people go that actually have knowledge. You haven't done anything along the way to have apprentice mentor pairs to perhaps allow that knowledge to live on in new people. And the idea that AI would somehow do that is erroneous.
A couple of quick thoughts. If you describe KM as a program, you're DOA.
Yeah.
First thing to go is a program.
As Larry said, dead man walking.
Dead man walking. The second thing, do what we've done in the intelligence world. Set up a meeting on the second or third Friday, to pick an example, in January, and have the KM leaders present to the executive team to answer one question. What has been your contribution to this organization in the past year? If you know you've got a meeting coming up on the second Friday of January, and you have to display the contribution and argue what the contribution is of KM to the organization, you will see KM very differently.
There's a
Very
famous
interesting.
case. So that the CEO of Hewlett Packard, Stan, I remember I was at a conference with him, and he said we have to do KM because our knowledge, 80% of our knowledge walks out of the building every night. And I said, why don't you focus on getting it to walk back in the next morning? And he did not appreciate that, but I would still stand by that statement.
There was a
And there
question.
was also the quote attributed to Lou Platt about, if we only knew what we
Oh,
knew.
yeah, the famous one, yeah.
Yeah.
But that goes back to the Greeks. So I can give you a Greek origin
Okay.
of that in the pre-Socratics if you want.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an Irish substance to it. But the notion of having to demonstrate what you have contributed to the organization, how you have contributed, becomes very, very important. We're all suffering in organization what I call now the fallacy of misplaced metrics.
Mm.
Yeah.
Goodhart's law. The minute a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a measure.
Yeah.
There's a question here. Is there a favorite story experience from your career that you haven't told us yet? And maybe a follow-up to that is there something that you wish you had known much earlier in your career? Yeah.
How many stories do you want?
The best, the best.
I can go back to a formative one. I was working on getting Indigenous Australians back onto food tucker. All right. So if you move them on to what's called bush tucker, you can reverse type 2 diabetes in Australian Indigenous. All right. And that was a complex project. Yeah, I was facilitating, I was working on that. And I previously worked in Kakadu and spent time in Kakadu. And one of the things which really struck me is the degree to which Indigenous communities ritualize argument. They're getting misused by New Age spiritual fluffy bunnies from California at the moment who want to sort of ascribe Indigenous wisdom. Indigenous people are deeply pragmatic and deeply scientific. I spent a week in the desert with Auntie Beryl and I learned things that I will never forget. Right? They just use slightly different language and they have no fear whatsoever of confrontation and argument because they know that involves discovery in a survival community. And I think that was pretty formative for me. And ritual descent, which is one of the most popular methods ever created, came from that experience.
What was the lesson that you learned for yourself in that experience?
Oh, that don't be afraid of arguing with things if you disagree with them, and don't be afraid of arguing with things, even if you think they may be right, but you think there's a weakness in the argument. Now, I grew up in that. That's a rhetorical tradition. We had to defend things we didn't believe in every week from the age of 11. Yeah, and we've got into this anodyne situation at the moment where nobody can take criticism because they think it's a criticism of them. And that's actually really damaging to knowledge development. So people don't understand our harm. They don't understand the value of highly ritualized dissent, yeah, in communities. And I learned that from Indigenous communities. I sort of knew it already, but it really came home to me that day.
But doesn't that also mean that when you don't want to be afraid of saying what you want to say because of the weakness in the argument, there has to be some kind of safety, psychological safety, to be able to say that,
And
right?
I think psychological safety is one of the great contracts perpetuated on business by Harvard Business School professors. Yeah, you need to create what we call a substrate or an environment. And I remember I've talked about ritualizing dissent, not personalizing dissent. And psychological safety has now come to be don't say anything which might possibly upset anybody. All right. And that's wrong. All right. Now we do work on early detection of misogyny, early detection of racism. Don't get me wrong. I don't think any of that is right. But if you end up with these highly sort of safe environments in which nobody dares say anything, and anything anybody says is associated with them personally, so people don't look at what they said, they look at the person saying it, you've got a real problem. Yeah, and we can start to see it. One of the reasons that populists are taking over is we took that sort of concept too far.
Well, I take your point, but that means there isn't any psychological safety. People are afraid to speak up.
No, I come back. Ritual is the way that human beings develop that capacity. Ritual is really powerful. And we use dissent, for example, through archetypal characters. That goes back to the stories of the Mullah Nasruddin. There are all sorts of techniques human beings have evolved to actually create a safe space for violent dissent. Right? But it's not about the person being safe. That's the mistake. It's this highly individualistic American attitude, which is the problem. which you don't see in collective communities. Collective communities show dissent constantly.
Okay.
But that's a really important point. Working with intelligence folks and organizations and trying to understand what's happening externally. You have to create the capability inside the meeting rooms for people to have very different perspectives, being allowed to create those different perspectives. You're trying to form a mechanism for them to talk about it. One of the ways we've used it for years and years is get people to expose the assumptions on which they're working and make sure you get conflicts in the assumptions, build real tension around the assumptions. You take the person out of that conversation. You focus in on the differences in assumptions, the rationale for the assumptions, the data supporting or refuting those assumptions. And you get to focus on the data, the reasoning and the analysis, and not on the person. That becomes part of the ritual that I think Dave is talking about.
And we do a lot of red-blue teaming. I mean, I've taken Taiwan 3 times in the last 2 years, on the blue team, on the red team, right?
Yeah.
Red-blue teaming is something which is underused in organizations. We use what's called anthrosimulation. So human-controlled games environments in fictional spaces in which everybody fails. And after 3 rounds of that, people scan 20 times more data before they make a decision than at the start. Because if you constantly fail, you learn far more than if you succeed. So fiction evolved in humans in order to allow people to fail without it being personal. Yeah, so we just don't use the techniques we evolved as a species enough in modern management.
And building on that, making sure people understand the distinction between data and reasoning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Explain.
Very important in context. Okay. Reasoning overpowers data every single time.
We only have 7 minutes left. So Brett, you have 2 minutes to explain, to say your question, so that they have 5 minutes to answer. Go. You're on mute, Brett.
You're still on mute, Brett.
Houston to Brett, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was having a mouse issue. Okay. Real quick. I've been in the business around 10, 12 years, been just studying academically since I started college in 2019 at Columbia. So now I'm thinking about this as a political, as a academic business as well as a practical business. Dave specifically, but all 3 of you have said basically the things that we basically hold as truths that we've learned in school are not necessarily sound because of reasons, and I'm not debating them, whatever. So 1, what should we be focusing on study-wise? And then 2, if we're talking to ourselves, who should we really be talking to about these KM truths, either the ones that we've always believed or the ones you guys purport or some combination thereof? Over.
Okay, that's a brilliant question. I mean, one of the things, before Trump, I used to really enjoy teaching at Quantico. And they're battle tours now, because in a military environment, you can have conversations you can't have in a civilian environment. But I'll give you one bit of advice. Do not read any management book, any management science book. It's not a science. It's got no value to it. It's case-based. It's based on designing a sales technique for a consultancy handbook, with 1 or 2 honorable exceptions, but not many. You need to read some basic stuff in what's called distributed consciousness. I would start with Andy Clark, who's one of the best guys on this. The fact that consciousness is a distributed function of the brain, the body, its social environment. You need to read some core cultural anthropology. You need to read some of the basic texts on complexity science, because that's critical. And you need to read some of the modern stuff on philosophy of information. So particularly, for example, in physics, we're now starting to argue that information may be a 5th type of matter and may therefore have momentum. And a lot of that stuff is readable. Constructor theory in physics is eminently readable. So I would go to the natural sciences, go to some basic tests, read those and think about them. Because that's far more effective than reading the wrong sort of synthesis that you see in management science.
One of the things that I've noticed over the last few years is the superficiality of the way people engage with information. Just to even read a book now, it seems like doesn't happen very much. let alone doing what Dave is recommending. I think that many of us are just dealing at the superficial level. There's posts on LinkedIn and somebody comments on it based on some image that they see, and they go off and have a discussion about that. And they won't even take the time to read the underlying article or read any of the books that have been written in our field. So I think my advice is, we've got to spend more time actually reading and learning and less time dealing at the superficial levels that we tend to do.
And don't be afraid. For example, this book has got more in it of relevance to knowledge management than anything you'll find in the NARCA. Yeah, I mean, that's just one I could pick up out of 1,000, all right? But there's developments in theoretical biology at the moment which are absolutely critical to modern knowledge management in terms of idealized group size, how groups trust each other. There's a whole body of scientific knowledge which has been subject to peer review and ratification. Yeah.
Liam?
My counsel in response to your good question is pick 3 or 4 or 5 of your good friends and have conversations. Okay. What is it that we're interested in? What challenges are we facing? What issues do we want to explore? And then identify short readings in good journals, Nature, Science, whatever, and then look at those articles and say, okay, what's the relevance of that to our lives, to the work that we do, to the organizations we're in? You will always find connections, and then discuss what are the implications of those connections. In other words, step out of your environment, use other sources to reflect on your environment, and take it from there.
Cool. Like that one I'm doing. That's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, Dave, I've got a map of the Brecon Beacons that I want to topographical on, and I definitely want to show it to you and get your signature on it, man, because I know that's a place you've walked around one of
That's
them
okay.
once.
And I'll cross out Brecon Beacons and replace it with Banai. We're trying to get you bring Welsh names back at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So we just have a couple of minutes left. So Liam, Stan, and Dave, just at the top of your head, what would you recommend to young KMers today who are trying to look for a job, transitioning into a job, trying to be relevant in their job? What's your word of advice?
Well, Nina's, I'll mention something that you're championing, which is the mentoring program, the KM peer mentoring program that Nina's is leading for both SIKM and KM4Dev. I think it's been a successful program. I've been a participant in it. I enjoy mentoring people. I encourage people, even those who are veteran KMers can learn from others. And sometimes you learn a lot being a mentor as much as the mentee does. So I'd endorse that.
Thanks, Stan. Liam, Dave.
Two simple related questions. What kind of knowledge do you want to develop for yourself that can be useful elsewhere as you go up the hierarchy or you move laterally across an organization? And the second question is, what don't I know? It's that second question that really gets people to stand back and say, wait a moment, there's big pockets of ignorance in my life that I need to address.
I think there's something you could very practically do quite quickly. Go into any university bookshop and ask for the introductory textbook in each of the major disciplines and take it away and read it. Because that would give you a much more generalist knowledge and that will give you ways to go downstream. But I think fundamentally, do what makes you curious and excited. Yeah, because then you'll be employable. Yeah. And the skills that you need are not the skills anybody can define for you now. And at all costs, avoid getting a KM certificate.
Amen.
Well, listen, I think we've come to time. So thanks so much to these three wise men for your wisdom. Okay, I'm using it in a different context. And for your stories. This was really helpful. I wish we had more time, but and I wish, well, I'm hoping that this won't be the last time we're going to have a conversation like this. And maybe there will be conversations with other experts as well, where we just don't talk KM, but KM and other stuff. So thanks everybody for attending. If you have questions, I will share the recording, I will share the chat, and I will share pictures that I have. Don't worry, we're not going to send it to LinkedIn, but I will share what I have to all of you. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll have another conversation like this in the near future. And please come to Knowledge Summit Dublin, because it's where the conversations take you to places.
By the way, we're actually combining Knowledge Management Summit with our AI Future Research Program. So that's going to be a combined event. We'll be announcing that next week.
Is there going to be a discount, Dave? for people?
If you want to attend both, it means you can save travel by going to both. All right. And yes, there will be a discount, but not as much as Barry wants to offer because he's obviously got more money than sense. All right. Sorry, Barry. All right. Yeah, no, we are actually combining an action research multi-company program on the balance of AI and human reasoning. And the first event is in Vancouver. The second will be combined with a knowledge summit.
Any word that you want to say, Cheryl or Sierra or Barry, before we switch off?
I just wanted to say, yeah, I hope to see everybody in Knowledge Summit Dublin. If you want to get more information, you can follow us on LinkedIn. And the early bird price half off ends on October 31st. So if you want to get your tickets, now is the time.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I guess we need to, everybody's busy, so we're going to let you off. So thanks everybody again.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks,
You're very
everyone.
welcome. And until our next
Thank you,
conversation.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Liam, Stan, and Dave.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. See you soon.
Bye. Bye, Liam. I'll connect with you one time when I'm in DC.
Okay, we'll do.
All right.
Anytime.
Okay. Bye-bye.